and that in relation to democracy. Basically, the idea of contained opposition is that, pretty much has the same result as controlled opposition, in that it's opposition that is tolerable, ultimately does not pose a real threat, and it ultimately kind of allows people to channel their desires to rebel against the system, and it's like a safety valve in many ways for the system to blow off steam. But how it works is that, unlike controlled opposition, which is a state phenomenon, a government phenomenon, contained opposition is a market phenomenon. It's a market-driven politics, in that it's the market actually giving people what they want, which is, they want ways to, oppose the system. The market sells you what? Leftism. And, one point that doesn't come across, I think, as obvious in that video, because I talk a lot about like these, just the abundance of protest movements that were completely useless. Some comments I still got, though, was, yeah, liberal protest, peaceful protest, it's all blah, blah, blah. It's, weak. We need real protests. I'm thinking, actually, I don't know if the line is so clear. And in my book, I have another subsection in that called the leftist industrial complex, which is, about like the whole way in which, due to the nature of social media landscape, the social media landscape, there is a huge, just endless possibility for people to meet the demands of people's radical urges by being like, okay, I want to learn why the world is wrong, and then to kind of be validated for why I feel the way I feel. Well, now you can go there, and there's endless of thought leaders who will tell you what to think and affirm your convictions. Now, someone might say, aren't like I doing the leftist industrial complex? Well, I don't know, maybe I started off that way, perhaps, but I definitely don't see that as what I'm doing, in the sense that what is the leftist industrial complex gives people what they want. It's a market-driven phenomenon. It's not like it gives people what you think they need, and which case that sometimes comes with backlash. You might tell people what they don't want to hear. You might piss off a lot of people. I do that all the time. And if it would be much easier for me if I pick and chose one faction and did this thing where I would attack other left leaders, left influencers. I hate this stupid term, but that's what they are. Influencers, capitalists, essentially, cultural capitalists, who will, go and attack other people on their side when they critique that side because it's spoiling the fun. And there's also an incentive there to steal market share. And that's what I think cancel culture ultimately is. Yeah. Cancel culture is a capitalist culture of competition, whereby people are put into competition with each other. And, they'll leap at the slightest opportunity to steal audience. And what do you think, like every cancellation of every figure, it's not usually driven from the bottom up. It's driven by the other people in that niche. It's not even driven by people in the opposite view. It's driven by people in that niche. It's like, whenever I hear anything about Anna Kasparian, it's like, look, I don't watch the Young Turks. I don't give a fuck what Anna Kasparian's doing. But whenever all the negative stuff I hear about Anna Kasparian is from other left commentators. And I can't help but think, why are you so obsessed with this woman? Is it really because you think she's so evil? Or maybe you just want to steal a little bit of that Young Turks audience? Totally. Because you can like make their audience feel good and not actually challenge their views with different perspectives. You can give them what they really want. So it's a market-driven phenomenon. And what this perpetuates is an opposition that is completely incompetent and self-marginalizing. Because if you are told that what you believe is true and you're not incentivized to critique, what you get, you don't have to have the government do anything. The movement self-marginalizes because it has no reason to adapt. It's literally evolutionary. And there's a whole other concept of this I read about, which is the paradox of why the most liberal societies have the weakest opposition. You would think it's the opposite, right? More freedom to organize would allow for greater, protest movements, greater organizations. What actually happens is, if you have the perfect formulation for a control society, I believe, is a high amount of civil liberties and a low amount of institutional democracy.
Welcome back to the channel.
Because if you have a low amount of institutional democracy, it's very hard to actually challenge the power structures, because it's hard to get officials elected to challenge big money. But if you allow a lot of civil liberties, what that does is it allows all of the political contradictions to play out in broad daylight and allow for the market to adapt and give people what they want in response to that. That allows this whole phenomenon to go on. And it also allows people to blow off steam and get the radicalism out like it's a goth phase and move on, right?
Right.
It's a really terrifying control system. And part of this is the, the paradox of competence, I call it, which is why in the most tolerant societies would you have the most ineffective opposition? Part of that is because there's a low barrier to entry. You don't have to think very hard before you go into activism. There's no risk. There is no risk. I mean, some lefties will go out and protest Trump's ICE deportations and act like, and they'll try to like jump, like do a front, like a backflip in front of a cop and get mad why they get hit, like, and say, "Oh, it was so brave," But let's be honest, a real brave, like, is somebody who's been very familiar with the Middle Eastern world for a long time. We always laugh when Americans complain about like democracy. It's like, real dictatorships, if you're a radical, that comes with such risk. You can literally disappear and be chopped up. In Latin America too had this experience. That is terrifying, but the silver lining of that, and I would not say these are preferable societies, but the silver lining to having really repressive systems is that the oppositional movements really are forced by necessity to devolve to adapt and become highly competent in their messaging, highly competent in their strategy, and just all around conscientious. Whereas what do you get in like the United States and Canada, for example? The stereotype of youthful, stupid, thoughtless, mindless radicalism, burning flags, just like no thought whatsoever. And it's because there's no barrier to entry and there's no necessity to actually evolve. If there was actually any risk that came with protesting, well, you would have to suddenly be like, okay, well, at least if I'm going to get targeted, I want to be a martyr. And you can't be a martyr if you say death to America, You have to have a message people actually like, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's
Right.
kind of I guess in a nutshell, the thesis of contained opposition.